Hi there, I'm Scott Lowe with Actual Tech Media, and thank you for joining us for this Discovery Series video. I'm joined today by Joe Mercies, who is the CEO of CloudDaddy. Joe, thank you for being here today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So we're going to talk about infrastructure management. And that at first might make people go, oh, okay. But it actually has some really important implications when it comes to security and data protection. And you guys at CloudDaddy are doing some really interesting things around infrastructure management and really bringing it into the fold of security. But let's talk about why it's so important for infrastructure management to be a front and center piece of your infrastructure strategy and as well as your security strategy.
The reason it's so important is because if you're not patching, updating, or loading your security updates, whether it's Microsoft or anybody else, you put yourself at risk. And you don't want to put yourself at risk from an enterprise perspective because you've got mission critical and applications and data, and you need to maintain business continuity. And that should be priority one. But what we're seeing is that's far from what's been happening over the years. So you back up 10 years ago, it was okay if you didn't load updates or patches for even, 3 years. Yeah, we're 4 or 3 years. Yeah, we'll get to them in due time. You didn't have the kind of things that are prevalent on the internet today from a maliciousness, virus, and ransomware perspective. And these things can do some critical damage and to your critical systems, and it could be irrecoverable, especially from a ransomware perspective. You don't want to pay the ransom. All right, you better be set in stone with your backup and disaster recovery policies, and you better have everything well placed and being able to perform a disaster recovery or total restoration of a machine in no time flat in order to maintain business continuity. So it's incredibly it could be incredibly expensive if you haven't done the due diligence to maintain that administration. Excuse me. And when you look at it, the administration comes out to be something that has to be done on a daily basis. So now, depending on the size of your data center and the footprint will dictate whether you can update everything in one shot. If you're a small to medium-sized business, you only have 10 servers or 15, 20 servers, maybe that's all fine and good, and you can update things relatively quickly, and everything's done at one shot, I should say. But if you're a very large data center, or if you're even multi-tenant, and you're a company that's actually hosting data for others, and you're responsible for it, and then that becomes a problem because now you have potentially hundreds of servers that you need to patch and update and maintain. Or if you're, simply an enterprise that has hundreds of servers, you're dealing with that responsibility of having to patch, update, and maintain. And the maintenance, I'm talking about administration, even from a policy perspective. Who's got access to the servers? Who can do specific low-level work on those servers? Do you have security groups in place where things are managed? Are there firewalls in place that are basically separating different orientations of and segmenting your data footprint? So even if you do get compromised in one place, it won't spread or potentially spread the compromise to a different place. So it's a nightmare of a situation these days in today's world of administering patches, updates, security updates, as well as the security posture from a policy perspective and just ability to access kind of perspective in terms of the data.
One of the things you mentioned before was this need to continually patch systems, and we didn't necessarily need to do it every day, and 10 years ago. I remember the days 10, 15, 20 years ago where you'd go to a server and it would say, your server's been up for 700 days. And I still occasionally hear vSphere admins talk with pride about the fact that their servers have been up for a year and a half straight. And to me, I'm like, that's a scary thing. Because now when you're designing infrastructure environments, you don't design them for individual node uptime. You design them for cluster or environmental and application uptime so you can actually service those individual nodes so that doesn't have to happen. And still, organizations don't always do that. But the other piece you talked about is the need to patch operating systems and applications and hypervisors and firmware on servers. And it's a non-trivial problem at scale. In small organizations, like you said, not too hard. You can get a person to go in and do that. But large organizations, you have to have something in place to do it for you because you can't hire enough people to just patch systems all day long. So what are some of the ways that people are addressing this?
I think that, and you're absolutely right, and I think that if you compared it to the past, I think that oftentimes there was a little bit of envy when you heard about, we haven't rebooted that system in a year. And it used to be predominantly the fact with Unix-based systems, right?
Or NetWare.
Yeah. NetWare, my Novell NetWare 3.11 server has been up and running for the past 2 years and we haven't touched it. Well, if you would have had that same system up today and you haven't touched it, that would be a major problem. Most likely it wouldn't have survived because it would have been infected with some kind of maliciousness, which would have required it to be patched and updated in order to prevent it from happening again. At that point, once you have the discontinuity, the breakage in terms of your mission critical app, you're going to put policies in place where that doesn't happen again, right? And this boils down to the upkeep of those systems, the administration, which is constant, as we all know. And it's just growing going forward in terms of importance, because if you don't patch, if you don't push the updates out as soon as you get them, because there may be a 0-day vulnerability out there, well, you take the risk. And that's when you get into the entire risk management of things. How long can you take that risk for before you potentially compromise your enterprise as an end result of not being able to patch or administer? And, this boils down to, us looking at a virtual server perspective versus a physical one too, because things are easier to do from a virtual sense as opposed to a physical sense, because you can literally get into a console and you can stop a virtual machine. You can patch it. You can also have an alternate virtual machine that picks up the load, for example, while you're patching that one. Now you bring it up, so there are all sorts of potential technological abilities that you have today versus in the past that make it easier. But still, in terms of footprint, if you've got a huge footprint, it makes it almost impossible to be up to date, with all of your systems at once.
And it makes it impossible to stay up to date with all your systems at once, but there's ways you can mitigate that a bit. One of them is through microsegmentation we talked about before, or at least segmented security in some way. But the other piece of this, as we're talking about on-premises infrastructure, but we actually have to think about the cloud now too. Now, it changes the patching story a little bit because in theory the provider has some responsibility for the hardware. But you're basically abstracting away that piece, and you have to then deal with the application and operating systems in some cases, depending on what you're doing, but other things. So what are some of the challenges in Amazon AWS, for example, or in an AWS type of scenario where patches, updates, and policy changes have to be considered by administrators? And how does that differ from what we're seeing in an on-premise environment?
I don't think it differs from an on-premise environment because the same types of patches and updates and security updates that are being released for operating systems, for example, even applications at that level, must be applied, regardless of whether they're on-prem or whether they're hosted in the cloud. And you mentioned AWS. From an AWS perspective, it doesn't matter. You're going to maintain a hybrid type of cloud scenario where you've got a portion of your data center that you're hosting and maintaining, and it's totally your responsibility. Well, guess what? The Amazon Web Services side, okay, you're not dealing with the hardware that is the foundation of what you're running. You don't have to worry about that, but you do have to worry about the operating systems and the applications that are running on that virtual machine in that virtual cloud setting, and you still have to have the exact same considerations and the exact same scenario unfolds in terms of administration. And what we're doing from a Cloud Daddy perspective is making it easier, at least to back up, replicate those systems, and also deal with those backups in terms of policies and whether you want those backups to remain indefinitely, from a permanency perspective, or whether you only want them to live and die after a certain point of view because they're being replaced up in the cloud. Makes it much easier.
So we start to think about infrastructure management. Security and data protection are key pieces of this. What is CloudDaddy doing to bring all of this together into a cohesive whole that helps people really improve their security posture in an AWS environment? Because CloudDaddy focuses solely on AWS workloads, correct?
That's correct.
So in that context, briefly, in a 30,000-foot view, how is CloudDaddy bringing it all together to help organizations improve their security and data protection postures?
At CloudDaddy, we believe that those three aspects are supremely important in terms of what normal administrators do and what normal enterprises, your average enterprise, has to deal with on a daily basis. So those are the three pillars, so to speak, that found CloudDaddy, and that's the foundation of our CloudDaddy Secure Backup solution. And those three pillars that make up that foundation consist of backup and disaster recovery, the data protection side, advanced security in terms of instance firewalling and integration of Amazon Web Services, web application firewall, firewall rules, templates, security groups, et cetera. That all folds out under that. And then in addition to that, you've got the infrastructure management, where you can see your infrastructure, whether it's volumes or instances, AMIs, or Amazon Machine Images, as they're referred to as, RDS databases, Redshift clusters, et cetera. You can see them, and they're in separate tabs, and you can see them all, very, very easily. So that's where we believe our product and our solution is unique in comparison to the competition, because we've taken those three pillars and we brought them together within one solution that focuses on all three.
It strikes me as we were talking, one of the things that just sort of I had an epiphany was you're bringing security into the fold. You're not treating security as a secondary thing to focus on. You're really addressing security right from the beginning. In everything you're doing. So it's a first-rate player in the organization. It's part of the infrastructure. It's part of everything you're doing. And you are not treating it as a separate silo of things to deal with. Because nobody wants to buy security, like nobody wants to buy insurance. But when it's already baked into the environment, it's great. You don't have to think about it then as much. You still have to think about it, but it's not something you have to focus on as much.
That's right. We're not telling you to get rid of any of the, security countermeasures that you've put into place. Most likely you've got all sorts of firewalls in place, and you've got other SIEM tools that you've implemented in terms of being able to, detect things, especially from an antivirus point of view on desktops, et cetera, as well as servers, as well as, there are tons of tools out there that allow you to look at the policies and ports and, give you reports and alerts and all sorts of logs where you can, get these reports and then take action on what to patch or fix, or what's lacking on a specific box. However, with the progression of technology and with the progression of malware and all sorts of cybersecurity threats today, we live in a world today that needs to be security focused and needs to be conscious of those threats. So that's where we believe the uniqueness of CloudDaddy's solution comes to the forefront, is because we've thought of multi-tenancy, and we've thought of advanced security, and we've thought of adding in the infrastructure management as a foundation to the product and growing into the future with that. So when you think about your backup and disaster recovery, it should take a paramount point of view in the back of your mind. You shouldn't go to sleep at night, if you're a CIO, you shouldn't go to sleep at night thinking, oh my God, what happens if we get hit with ransomware in the morning, and are we prepared? You should rest easily knowing that I've got an implementation, or I've got a solution which is, number one, able to back up and provide me my disaster recovery by replicating objects wherever I may need them, being volumes or instances, AMIs, et cetera, and also is taking a security focus and maintaining a view on what's happening and taking action on anything potentially that is going on within my infrastructure hosted on AWS and protecting me by adding an additional layer of, cybersecurity countermeasures on top of what I already have. And then you bring in the infrastructure management piece, and it's just, okay, I see all of my infrastructure before me. I can back it up. I can replicate it, cross account, cross region. If you compare it back to the old days, how did you do DR? Disaster recovery.
Poorly in a lot of cases.
Exactly. So you had your tape backups from your tape library, you put them in a suitcase, you took them off site somewhere. Maybe you put them in, some third party facility that was locked up in a vault, right? And when you had a natural disaster, you called upon it, right? Today's world is totally different. That side of the scenario doesn't even work from a cloud perspective. It could, if you force it to work, you can make it work, but why, when you have the breadth of a hyperscale cloud environment like Amazon Web Services, where you can literally replicate your instances to other regions? Oh yeah, I want to replicate an instance over to US West 1 or Central US. Sure, I want to put it in Europe. Sure, you can do that. I want to put it in a more secure account within AWS. I can do that. So you can literally have the ability to replicate your infrastructure anywhere in the world and back it up anywhere. And also back it up cross account anywhere. You never had that in the past. So you basically have this onion that you keep adding layers of protection to, depending on your environment and your potential risk.
But the beginning and end of all that starts with infrastructure management.
That's right.
You have to have it all integrated in one place in order to be able to look at all this, in order to be able to do all of this.
That's right.
Joe, thank you very much for this great discussion.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.